Hi. In this video, I will discuss the notion of supply chain and supply network as they apply to complex services. As you will see, it is vastly different, and as the name says, more complex. Mind-bogglingly so, in fact. So this lesson then is challenging. It is very conceptual and extremely important for anyone intent on improving, designing, or competing in this type of environment. So let me first introduce the notions that I would like to present today. The key concepts are service episode, client system, professional system, complex service delivery system, complexity science. Yes, there is a science of complexity. The notions of power, irreducible uncertainty, control and emergence of process as well. Supply chain in a general sense is defined as follows. Supply chain management consists in the management of a network of interconnected businesses involved in the ultimate provisions of products or service package required by end customer. And a supply network, defined used here, is a network of firms that exists upstream of any one firm in the whole system. Now, as you will see, the notion of upstream when it comes to complex services is certainly not very useful, as processes are not linear. And customer has a lot to say about the way the process goes, and professionals also have a lot to say. I said complexity science. I will right up first present a model of that and the ingredients of that. And then I will illustrate with three generic examples, three industries really: the health sector, social services, and engineering and design and construction. So I got three specific examples and generic modeling from which you should be able to abstract generality. I will come back to the model at the end. Here's the model. Very different from what you would think as a supply chain, a triangle of many companies with many parts coming together from all sorts of parts or all sorts of places around the world and eventually integrating into a product. This is extremely challenging. And most of our best mind are dedicated in the field of operations management to the understanding and the better management of these chains. Now, in complex services, this is even more challenging and certainly much less well understood. Here's the model. This here represents an organization. The arrows, as usual, are processes. Those plus and minus here are experts. There are experts intervening. Professional of various sorts. It could be an engineer, an architect, a designer, a marketer. So you've got various types of experts intervening in here in processes that are sometimes connected with interface here, as you see with the chain. And sometimes there's direct professional to professional interface. Planned or not, spontaneous or not. We have network connectivity in here that sometimes is programmed and does not happen. Sometimes is not programmed and happened. And could be determinant in the ultimate outcome. A client system. As you'll see in the social work example, there's a family unit. In the construction, there's a company. We are in B2B environment here. A company has all sorts of departments, all sorts of interests, different mental models as well, different requirements with whom the provider has to deal. So you have a client system with its own internal dynamics. And those here are adjacent systems that will vary from industry to industry. They constrain, they limit what can be done here. And the frontiers are changing, as you will see. That's part of the mind-boggling aspect of and the very stimulating, might I add. aspect of it. What are the features of such system? So again, we have several organizations, many processes here and there, and client system which may or may not have the choice about how he or she goes about this. And the resulting interactions will determine the flow. Each flow being different according to the situations, and each outcome, of course, being determined by all of this. Here are the features. There are agents. I'm using the word professional, but I mean people referring to a conceptual body of knowledge and acting on the basis of this body of knowledge, which lies outside the organization, and having very often responsibility vis-a-vis controlling bodies, external controlling and certification bodies. The company does not, certainly not fully control what they do, and what they do is determined. Schema refers to the mental model. Now, the more power these people have, the more latitude to act, the more they determine the outcome. Of course, irreducible uncertainty. Complicated system you can pull apart and simplify, analyze individually. Complex system you cannot. Nonlinearity, I said that. Network connectivity, I will illustrate with example. Dynamic environments, changes all the time. Absence of a global controller. Nobody designed it very often, nobody controls it. Many levels of analysis, zoom in, zoom out, and an internal dynamics that changes. It changes as a result of a number of emerging features, and the system shifts and drifts, and the ability to detect how and why, and to find the points where you can influence it is the crux of the matter. Those are the key notions, and to illustrate them, allow me again to switch to Prezi as a mode of presentation. It is more dynamic in many ways and has features that I could not reproduce with simple PowerPoint. So here we are. Each expert in any field will more or less go through these phases. Before I get in contact with a customer, he or she has to come to me, or the business has to come to me, or the issue has to come to me. And there is an intake and a path to this. Critical to expertise and professionalism is the notion of a diagnostic. Even if there's been many experts involved previously, even if they have diagnosed, any expert will make his own diagnosis before acting, considering the actions and the input and the analyses of his colleagues, but he will make his own diagnostic, from which he will decide on a course of action, and the course of action will be applied. There'll be implementation. I call this treatment. It seems to be a medical example here, but it is really generic. Once you've made up your mind of what it is, what should be done, then you have to do it, or someone has to do it. So this is the implementation part of the model. Let's take a cancer case. Start with health. This is from chapter 5, where I guess with this drawing it does appear linear. You know, you go to an urgentologist, GP visits, diagnostic, you are diagnosed with, you know, this type of, say, skin cancer. You meet various specialists, and then of course there are processes, technical processes, various tests that you have to do. The clerical processes, administrative, transactional process in between that you have to do, like payment, like documentation. Then there's specialists. They interact with you, they interact among each other. Some actions are decided. You may have to go to surgery, and so on. It looks linear, because I have to draw something here, but it is anything but linear, as you can go back and forth, and each case will be different depending on the mindset and the moment and the type of interaction that take place between the patient and the professional, and among professionals as well. And if those technical processes, support processes, perform as well, there's interaction here also, of course. Now, each of those go through intake, diagnosis, prescription, treatment. Surgery. Intake, dispatch, diagnosis, prescription. Of course, when you come to surgery, you've been diagnosed, but the surgeon will meet you before and will wake up his or her mind before acting. So you again go through this model. Now there is, and this is a reference here, there's a vast body, there's a vast discussion going on about most hospitals trying to diagnose, prescribe, and treat in the same facility. And diagnosing require a specific type of environment where flexibility is critical, institutional flexibility. Treatment, on the contrary, requires effectiveness. It's more linear. And if you try to do speed, low cost, flow through, more typical operations management notion apply better here. And if you try to do the two things together, you're bound to be out of focus. And that is probably one of the major problems we have in most of our hospitals right now. And the high cost. Being out of focus, meaning that you're trying to be more efficient in an area where in fact you need flexibility to get the right diagnosis and the speed of diagnosis. So this is a related issue of how do you structure and group these activities into processes. The intake process, as I already said, and that again is from chapter 5, typical process. Customer comes into contact with someone, then there's a dispatch, and then at some point there's a generalist, and that's not only true of medical services. There's a generalist, a professional that may detect the need for a specialist professional in a second or third line and send you there, and so on. I recently studied a case of a skin cancer that did not go so well. Here's the case. Patient goes to see a dermatologist with whom he's got a long-standing relationship. There's a mole. Dermatologist is unsure. Come see me back in 3 weeks. Apply this cream, that cream, and so on. In 3 weeks, it has grown. And he looks at it again, and he concludes that it is a squamous cell carcinoma. Calls immediately a surgeon, plastic surgeon, for removal. A meeting, an appointment is set for the patient. Unfortunately, administrative processes don't do so well. It takes a while for the actual appointment to take place. The surgeon looks at it. I don't think so. I think this will go away by itself. Come and see me back in 3 weeks. Doesn't call back his colleague. Now there's 2 diagnoses here and there's a major gap. But he doesn't call back. He's obligated to give some feedback, so he writes a letter at some point which gets into the dermatologist's file at some point in the pile. And it takes again a while because of administrative procedures or because the patient himself is not really proactive into it. It takes a couple of months before they see and meet. And at that time, it is obviously a squamous cell carcinoma stage 4. And the end game, of course, is not very fortunate as the patient dies and we are in court. And this is why I know about this case. It's court documentation. When these processes fail, they tend to end up in court, and court tend to be very descriptive. And millions of dollars of settlement. And of course, the thing is death. Nothing linear, nothing standard about what happened there. Irreducible uncertainty. Dermatology is a visual science. They look, experience, training, make a judgment. Different specialists, different training, different conceptual model, different experience, different judgment. The process is that if it were me, I would certainly like them to talk to each other right away, discuss. You would expect your professionals to think about you, not their egos, not their busy schedule, and to get together quickly and confront and discuss my case with all the best knowledge they have and seek a third opinion or better test or whatever. It doesn't happen that way, I'm afraid. When I say I'm afraid, sometimes I'm even scared. So there you go. Moving on, second example. What I'm trying to illustrate here is the differences from the notion, the traditional notion, the manufacturing notion of a supply chain. Service is not really what's upstream here. Well, the dermatologist saw the patient before the surgeon. Yeah, it's upstream in that sense, but then the patient could have gone back to see a GP at that time, or he could have gone directly to a specialist if he knew one, or if he'd seen him before, or if he heard about him. It's not linear. It is there's connectivity. It is idiosyncratic. And it is not as if you are putting parts together to get a product. The service starts at the first contact. The value creation or destruction starts at the first contact. So it's more of a network than a chain, first thing. Let's look at a Child Protective Service example here. This is, again, from Chapter 5, I believe. Typical flow. Call comes in, there's a problem with child safety or development may be endangered here, and someone's got to make a decision about what action to take. So you see him running here. If he thinks there's a problem, and again we have irreducible uncertainty, the professional assesses a situation. Again, using his conceptual model, his abstract knowledge, and his experience to make a decision. Then there's a legal system here. If he thinks that the child should be removed from the family, he's got to go to court, and then you have the complete legal system influencing this. The judge may decide that, well, for a period of evaluation of 30 days, this child will have to go into a reception center, and in the reception center, of course, they will go through the intake and diagnosis and so on, and again, subject to expert judgment. You may analyze just this, still you have irreducible uncertainty in the process. And the outcome here may be depending on the judgment, sometimes the stat judgment of an expert, of a professional, of a situation. The total life course of a child and a family may be affected. I've again studied a case of a family in the UK being wrongly suspected of child abuse. And the case is really pathetic as a young girl goes to the hospital. Doctor looks at her in the pubic area and decides like on the spot, well, this is sexual abuse. Social services are calling, police is called in, the family is interviewed, courts, judges, fights. The doctor says out loud that he thinks this is that. So whenever the parents go to the hospital, everyone looks at them. So you see the subtle nuances in there. You can imagine the pathetic situations that we have here. The end game is about 5 years until another expert, a bigger doctor from a bigger hospital, comes with a different diagnosis. And they finally confront it, and the same judge apologizes to everyone, but then the family's been destroyed, and a child that was perfectly well balanced now is imbalanced forever, and the family never gets back. Even the neighborhood, those kind of noises spread around. And I'm not using this to say that Child Protective Services is bad. You understand these services better when they fail. And those cases tend to be more documented. Of course we need Child Protective Services. It is extremely challenging, and it is complex in the sense that I'm talking about here. So, back to this simple model that is repeated all the time. You have to take into account then the nature of the professional-client interaction, which is sometimes, you see the professional as a relationship to develop, and he has an analytical model here. His analytical model in one way refers to his conceptual model, abstract notions of his, and also of his business. Professional very often is in business, and he's got a business interest. From this, moments of truth, perceptions on the client's part, drives his future actions. Same thing here. We have perception here, and it drives the behavior, and it drives the interaction. And below all this, we have processes. Processes that we seek to design, improve, control. Let's take the pharmacy example. If you can move from one example to the other. Here, the professional, the expert, is the pharmacist. We map this. In process control, we try to get feedback from the process, compare to standard, voice a customer, and take controlling action. What I'm trying to say here is that don't forget that there is somewhere in there one or several experts that you do not fully control, and whose judgment, split-second judgment at time, that you do not control based on a model, an abstract model that lies in the realm of pharmacy science, will have a determinant impact. This is unsettling in many ways, and it challenges us to find ways to include this sort of latitude, this sort of independency, of agency, if you like, in our analyses. From this, I will go back to my PowerPoint slides because they will allow me to present some other aspects a little better. Let's see where I was here. Back here. There I go. So let me try and modelize what I've said here. And I'll give a last example before I modelize, because I've been talking about health and individual services. Let's look at B2B for a second. You are now in 1976 at the Kansas City Hyatt. Just built, fabulous looking, isn't it? With this great walkway in between the two parts of the hotel where you have huge parties and people dancing all around. Fabulous, you see. And big dance tonight, 5 to 8. And of course, you have this situation, not of course, but this is a well-known case, landmark case really in engineering. It fell down. And here you have 111, but the end game was a 114 death from that. What is the complex service delivery process here? I'm talking design and construction of a commercial building. The client system includes the various parts of the organization, from the shareholders to the Department of Marketing, who thought that this design would be great compared to competition on the other side of the street, whatever other brand name was there. There's accounting and finance that has a budget to follow. There's the general manager. There's operations, who will have to operate this hotel. There's strategic analysis. So you have many stakeholders within the hotel. And on the other side, you have an architect who's trying to understand his client's need. It is multi-headed client's needs. Design something creative. Test with structural engineer whether the thing will stick together. And this has to go to other types of engineer. And eventually the bracket here, was that bracket exactly right? And what happened? Well, there's drafting at some point. There's a technical drafting process. It goes from an idea to a sketch to an eventual drawing. And this drawing goes to structural engineer. And the structural engineer suddenly gets a big contract. So he outsources part of the work, interact with another engineer, try to explain what it is. The subcontracting engineer says, well, this type of, what did you mean by that? Is it a heavy duty bracket, and what type of resistance? And it's all over the phone and over busy schedules that are changing all the time. So compare this to Child Protective Services, to the health example. Experts in a field referring to a mental model and their own experience, and environments, a contract situation here where the client has a lot of money and a lot of power, and the client suddenly realizes that the competition on the other side of the street has made a strategic move, changing their own design and facilities and services. So he wants a fast track. Calls the engineers, I need this fast track, can you do this? If you can, well, here's what's in it for you. And fast tracking, of course, everyone is running, and some processes have just been changed, and things that would have been done formally are not done over the phone. And the situation thus is not linear, irreducible uncertainty, changing environments. The system emerges and flows with nobody in total control. There is no global controller here. This is complex service delivery system, complex service delivery network. The client navigates in this system with more or less power. In the case of the hotel, client power is quite substantial. In the case of Child Protective Services, client power is much less. The professionals have a lot of power, and among professionals, doctors, the relation between doctors and social workers, who's got the more status in society, who calls the shot. In this case, it was one senior doctor, the example I gave, he had a great reputation, and he impacted the judgment of social workers in that case, and through that, the judge, and so on, until a more senior doctor. So you see the professional system here is at play. Regulators set the rules. They're very busy. The situation changes. They have little resources, government. And management power in this is what we're talking about. This book, how do you manage all this situation? Realizing that depending on the service, the flow of power here is measured by one's capacity to impose one's will on the course of event. And you see that depending on the situation, and even in a given industry, depending on the moment and how events happen, this power shifts. It is determinant. Let's revisit this. Zoom in, things happen, one-to-one, face-to-face contact between the general manager and the architect and the engineer. Look at professional-to-professional contact. The architect interfaces with the engineer. Very different professions. One has a vision in his mind, the other one has equations. And they're trying to connect with each other, and if they don't, you see what could happen. You understand these services better, unfortunately, when they fail. So, trying to recap this visually, several professionals, one client, business or individual, and it could be a multi-cephal client here. There you go. It's not very elegant, but reality is not elegant either. It is not linear. The client, let's call the client what he does through a service episode. He goes through his own corridor in an episode, and the professional interact with each other. Three-way interaction here. So you have a client system and you have a professional system where lawyers interface with social workers with doctors with judges, and so on. And those systems, if you look here, you have the client family, you have the reception center, social workers. Those are all subsystems that interact with each other. The family, the poor family in this case, it really is bounced around like this. And those systems evolve. Laws changes. The relation between law firms and judges and social work agency evolve at the same time. You see, you're beginning to see, I hope, what I mean by complexity. I'm not trying to simplify it today. I'm trying to make you see reality as we understand it today. So, if you reduce this system and zoom out a little further, one feature of complex services is that there can be several layers of analysis. You can analyze them from very high up to very zoom in. So we're zooming up here, zooming out. This system, the Child Protective Services, is surrounded by a political system, religious systems, which of course have incidence in our value, social value system, religious or not, economic system, and the boundaries between those systems changes, sometimes pretty fast. In short then, complex service delivery system, complexity science. There are agents with referring to abstract bodies of knowledge. And they have the schema that you do not control and that does evolve. Science evolves, knowledge evolves. And each individual agent, through his own experience, evolves as well. Dimensionality is the extent of their power. Irreducible uncertainty, nonlinearity. I guess you get that by now. Network connectivity, dynamic environments, no global controller. Many levels of analysis, as I've just illustrated, the zoom in, 1 second contact, eye contact, and the high level social view, and the resulting self-organization and emergence. Thus the model, processes within organizations, boundaries that are changing, expert within some process, technical processes in between without experts, sometimes inter-process direct contact, sometimes spontaneous choices by either one of the professional, the client, or as a result of their interaction, spontaneous changes in those systems. The client system and adjacent system that are moving all the time. So let me just draw a couple high-level conclusions. Having thrown confusion, sorry if I thrown a monkey wrench into your well-organized world and mine. The object of study is a system, not a chain. It is not a supply chain, really. It is complex and emergent. Often, if not generally, it was never designed and there is no overall controller. You should not approach this with a factory control mindset. Factory control notions are great. You need more. Efforts aimed at controlling may be counterproductive. If I'm putting pressure on someone that has enough power to resist and resent this, what kind of effect will I have? I should know this. Not that we should not try to control, but we should sometime understanding the system and knowing where the fault lines are and the leverage points are is a better option. Subtle tweaking, pressure here, change of rule there, subtle nudges and guidance, as well as rule changes may often be much more effective. Changing simple rules and letting the system emerge. This is our challenge. It is very, as I've said the word several times, it is certainly challenging, but it is very stimulating as well and fascinating. Thank you for your attention. Goodbye.